A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. As-salatu was-salamu ala Muhammadin wa alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Rabbi zidni ilman. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Today inshallah we will be continuing with our topic of parenting in the light of Quran and Sunnah. And today we will be talking about we will basically be reflecting on the issue of whether it is actually more difficult to raise children today in the 21st century. And the reason why it is important to ask that question is because at some point everyone, every generation thinks that the youth today are, less responsible than they were. And in fact, there's a great saying about somebody ranting about the youth, and actually what it turns out is that it was said by Socrates all those years ago. So the idea, today we're actually going to look at critically whether it is actually different to raise children today, and if so, what are the differences? So, there was a study done in the 1940s about the disciplinary problems in high schools, and teachers were asked what were the main problems that they were facing with the children and their classes, and this is the list that they gave. So there were things like talking out of turn, chewing gum, making noise, running in the halls, cutting in line, littering, running in the hallways. And this was the kind of things that the teachers used to find a challenge. And if you compare it to a study that was done towards the end of the century, last century, so that's already now 14 years ago, the top disciplinary problems in high schools were drug abuse, alcohol abuse, school violence, date rape, cyberbullying, pregnancy, suicide, gangs and cults, teen depression, teen suicide, theft and robbery, verbal abuse of teachers, sexual harassment, and that is both for students and again towards teachers, and the use of carrying of weapons by the students. So as you can see with this list, there is a major difference that has happened within the last half a century or more in what teachers and parents are facing in terms of the youth culture. So the signs of the times, to put it in a nutshell, is there has been a quantitative rise in youth violence and crime. There is an increase in peer cruelty. So although bullying in the playground has been there for forever, there is a difference in the kind of bullying that happens now, and especially with the rise in cyberbullying, which is a new thing in the sense that the internet wasn't there half a century ago. That is actually a very insidious form of cruelty, because it can be done with very little cost to the person who is doing the bullying. So you can be extremely, you don't have to face your victim at all. And in that sense, it does encourage, there is almost like a safety blanket for the person who is doing the bully. They don't really have to even look eye to eye with the person who is being bullied. There is a rise in youth stealing, and by the way, this was found to have nothing to do with the level of the socioeconomic status. So it could also be that children coming from homes where they don't need the money, where they don't need the things, but they are engaging in in that kind of behavior. There is an escalation in cheating, and in fact, it is very strange, because in the old days, it used to be that if a youth got into trouble, they would, the school could count on the parents to support the school. And now what most educators lament is that instead of supporting the school in disciplining their child. The parents actually tend to take the side of the youth and give such examples as, if there is something that goes on the record, or if they're disciplined, it will hamper their chances for success in the business world or in their employment. There is an increase in sexual promiscuity. So again, this is qualitatively different because there were always teens and young people who were promiscuous. The difference was that it used to be related to relationships. So if you were in a relationship and you tended to go too far, that was the risk. The youth culture today actually does not want to invest the time in relationships, and that is an extremely disturbing trend. So you have things like what they would call friends with benefits, or hooking up. All of these things basically mean that they don't want to invest in relationships, and it leads to actually multiple partners without what they believe very few strings attached. And obviously we know that there is a huge rise in substance abuse as well, and it's not only alcohol and drugs, but also there is quite a concerning trend of prescription medicines being abused. For example, even medication or substances that lead to, for example, enhanced focus or enhanced concentration. So many young people, successful, who are doing well at school, they will use substances to increase their performance in terms of cognitive focus, and this is quite a disturbing trend. So there's a lot written about what is causing this crisis of conscience. And, the three main things that we will discuss today are firstly the media and peers, and then parenting practices. And when we're talking about media, obviously we are talking about digital media, about television, about the music that children hear. And what is disturbing is that there is such a devaluing of values, and a slow diminishing, erosion of values, that it's very difficult to know what's going on. And I like to call this the boiled frog syndrome, which means basically that if you put frogs in boiling water, obviously they will want to save themselves and they will jump out. However, if you put a frog in room temperature or lukewarm water and then slowly take the temperature up, what happens is that the frog does not realize what is happening, and before he knows it, he is actually boiled and loses his life. So that is pretty much what is happening to the conscience of the youth these days, because there is the lack of morality and ethics is so prevalent in the media that it's very difficult to even judge where the lines are, and there's basically a slow desensitization of consciousness. Peers, there's a lot that parents talk about peer pressure for children, but I do believe that even parents go through peer pressure from other parents, and what that leads us to do is, especially if, for example, everyone in my child's class is doing something or has a certain gadget or is dressing a certain way, and I choose to have different sets of rules in my house, there will be quite a bit of pressure, not only on my children, but on me as well, to conform to what the standard is in that class. And lastly, parenting practices. So again, what we do at home is definitely contributing to this crisis of conscience. So let's talk a little bit about parenting styles. There are, there could be others, but basically the classic parenting styles are the neglectful, which means that you basically neglect your children and do not provide for their basic needs, for security, for love, for nourishment, both physical and emotional. Or you could be authoritarian. Authoritarian means that you do expect a lot from children, but you are less responsive to their emotional needs. And then on the other spectrum would be permissive. Permissive means that there are very few rules, that the children are in charge pretty much of what goes on, that you are very responsive to their emotional needs, but there is very little expectation from them and very few rules that they have to follow. Then we have a new kind of parenting, which is very recent in terms of historically, and that is called helicopter parenting, and which means that parents hover around their children just like a helicopter for longer than they need to. In other words, even if when the children are able and capable of looking after their own needs, the parents are over involved in their lives. They cannot let go. So, for example, parents who will continue to supervise homework into the teen years and beyond, who will so homework is a really good example, being over involved in the academic life of the child to the extent that it is hampering their confidence, right? And then we have authoritative parenting, which means that you are both responsive to the child, and yet you have very clear boundaries, you have clear rules, and you do expect a lot from them in terms of behavior, in terms of performance, in terms of contribution to family life. And at the same time, you do have a great relationship with them and you are responsive to their needs. So, just a question, have our parenting practices changed over time? And which one do you think is the most Islamic? So this is just a little bit of reflection for us to consider. So there was a very large scale parenting practices at the Millennium Study done, which showed basically that our generation of parents, those who are bringing up Gen Z, what is called, or the net generation, at least in North America, because it was a North American study, what they found was that we are giving too much and expecting too little. In other words, we are too permissive with our children, and we cater to their needs for material things, and we do give them a lot of praise, and we don't expect enough from them. So we tend to, and we've, at least in North America, we have this saying about how 30 is the new 20, or 20 is the new 30, whatever, basically meaning that children are growing up much later in terms of taking responsibility. On the other hand, however, they are growing up way too fast in terms of sexual maturity, for example. And what more they found was that we very often blur the line between friend and parent, and that given that our generation in the I'm talking about globally now, has more material resources than ever before. So we are able to give our children a very quote unquote good life in terms of material possessions. So we do that. However, the way modern life is structured, we have too much of everything except time. And that is, that has been a significant change in terms of parenting practices over the last half a century. And, putting it into the Islamic context, this hadith says that the worst of parents are those who transgress their limits in their love and goodness to their children. So again, this refers to the fact if we give in too much, and parents are, when we were growing up, or when my generation was growing up, the difference was that the family life, the community was adult centered, and children were expected to just fit in. Now, that may not have been the ideal thing, but what has happened now is that the whole world, families especially, tend to be extremely child centered. So, in other words, to give you one example, if there is a difference between visiting grandparents or having somebody over, and many families will choose not to do that because the child's routine cannot be disturbed, they need to go to bed at a certain time, and or they have an exam, or they're too tired. And there's, again, in balance, there's nothing wrong with that. But when the children's needs are being met at the expense of other people in the family, then it is not a healthy precedent to set for the child. So, one of the things that the study said was about we blur the line between parent and friend. And again, just a question of reflection, if to ask ourselves if we are buddies or friends with our children, right? And, this is tends to cause a lot of heated debate in workshops about, yes, we are friends with our children, and, we were never friends with our parents, and we want to parent differently. And it's really good to have that kind of a relationship with your children. And I completely agree that a great relationship with your children is, it's basically the only leverage we have as they grow. So it is extremely important to have a good relationship with the children. However, we do need to recognize that there is a big difference between friendship and parenting. So, for example, the role of a friend is to hang out, to just be there, to support you in whatever you decide. A parent's role, however, often necessitates unpopular decisions in the short term, which is not something that a friend would do, right? So, the idea that, I always like to think that our children have lots of friends, but they only do have, one set of parents, and we need to be parents to our children and not their friends. It does not mean that we don't have a great relationship with them, that we have open communication, that we have mutual respect, that we enjoy each other's company, that we share interests. All of these things can be done within that relationship. And if that is how we define friendship, then, great, we can be friends with our children. But, if our relationship is actually coming between making a poor decision on behalf of them, or we are scared to upset them in the short term, that's when we need to recognize that this is not a healthy relationship and we need to be in charge as parents. The last thing that they said was that the great time famine, that we don't have, we don't have the time that it takes to parent effectively. And we have, in the world today, or in the pop culture today, we have this myth of quality time. And the thing with quality time, all of us who are parents recognize that in order to get a little bit of quality, we actually need a lot of quantity. So the magic moments of parenting do not happen, when you schedule 2 hours to have a special day out. In fact, the pressure of the 2 hours on a special time actually puts a hindrance on that, right? The magic moments of parenting happen in the very ordinary day-to-day interactions, for which you actually need a lot of quantity, right? Also, we need to distinguish between being efficient as well as effective. So let's take an example. For example, if your 4-year-old was throwing a tantrum for something, the most efficient way to end that tantrum would be to give in, because it would be the end of the tantrum and you could go on with your day. However, a more effective way of parenting would be to actually, stay strong, ride out the tantrum and give the message that you are in charge, and that tantrums will not get the child their way. So again, in parenting, sometimes being effective does take a lot more time in the short term. However, in the long term, it is more effective and it does pay off. So again, training and discipline, all of these things, we do need to recognize that it's a time intensive process to parent. And I think this quote, which was in a Newsweek article, is very telling. It says that there is a lot of anger in my generation. This is by a 17-year-old. And he says that kids are angry for a lot of reasons, but mostly they're angry because parents aren't around. So after all that sobering news, let's talk a little bit about the good news. So, what we've been talking about is, how things have gone wrong. But on the other hand, we also have really good, solid evidence on what does work in parenting. So it's not a question of, that all is lost. In fact, it's actually really, different from what it was like good old, if somebody was, an older person was advising you. It's a little bit different in that now we actually have research based, we have evidence on, what works in parenting and what doesn't. And also we need to continuously remind ourselves that parents do have a lot of influence in how children turn out. So if we do our job, if we are intentional, if we're willing to learn, if we're balanced, proactive, if we keep taking charge of ourselves and learn what works in parenting, then we have a really good chance of raising our children well. So we really do need to remind ourselves that. And lastly, parents of children of parents who practice authoritative parenting, which again means that you have a great relationship and you set limits and you are clear in your value system, they have the best outcomes for children. And I'd like to end with this slide, which I think gives us a lot of very simple ways where we can make things better. And again, the parenting practices at the Millennium Study found that the too good to be true teens, in other words, they didn't go through the normal teenage troubles, they weren't sexually promiscuous, they didn't have eating disorders, they did not have mental health issues. They were successful emotionally, academically, and they were what you would call well-adjusted. So these teens had 5 things in common. Their families frequently ate dinner together. So this is really important news for those of us who have young children and who want to put them in a lot of different activities, right? The extracurricular activities were found to make very little difference in how children turn out or how successful they are academically. So that's a really good piece of information to have, right? So their families frequently ate dinner together. They came from a whole family, in the sense that the parents were not divorced or separated. And again, the idea is that, if we are single parents, it's not the end of the world. What it does mean is that we need to work hard at other things to make sure that the risk factors for children are minimized and the protective factors which will give them the best chance at being successful are maximized. They had to keep their rooms clean. So in other words, they had some expectations. When they were living in the space, they were members of the family in which they contributed, and they were responsible to the other members of the family. They didn't have a phone in their room. So again, that meant that they couldn't hide out in their room, that they had to actually interact with the rest of the family. And for phone, I would also add their computers and obviously digital stuff, right? That's a whole different series that we can do about parenting in the digital age. But basically, when we share those things in a public space, it's much healthier for the children. And lastly, they did community service. In other words, they were members of the community at large. They thought outside themselves. They had empathy for other humanity, and they actually did service. So these, what I really like about this piece of information is that these are simple things that we can all start to the best of our ability within our homes to make sure that our children turn out okay. Especially the first one, that is something that we can start today, inshallah. So that's the end of this module, and inshallah we will see you on the next one. Take care and Assalamu alaikum.